Hello nerds, JJ Kai Morris here. Welcome to my channel. Happy Valentine's Day. In honor of this day, I thought I'd do something a little bit special today. I thought I'd do a little reading of one of my stories. This is a gothic vampire story that I thought was appropriate for Valentine's Day. And this will be my first reading, so hopefully it goes well. If not, I will not be uploading this video. This is a chapter that I wrote in my latest release, Eris, which is a novella that I wrote in collaboration with the band Illyria. I'll be reading it from my iPad today since my author copies still have not shown up. But I have emailed them and they are resending the package, so hopefully I should get those soon. But if you want to check out Eris, it is available in ebook and paperback. Ebook, it's available everywhere. Paperback, it's available on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. I will let you know that currently the book is cheaper on Barnes & Noble because Amazon likes to make their own prices for things. So if you want to buy a paperback, go to Barnes & Noble. If you want to get the ebook, get it wherever. It should be the same price everywhere. Anyway, let's get started. So this is chapter 5, and this story is called Sweet Lilly. The sweet, sweet aroma of fresh blood left Clavanor in ecstasy, the tang of it still hot and saccharine on his tongue. He savored the flavor, letting the remnants roll around in the moist swells of his mouth. Oh, and the screams. The screams had just faded from the air like the whoosh of a door closing behind a lover's exit. Clavanor stood in the depths of his haunted retreat, basking in the miasma of blood-tinted air and the fading memory of his victim's dying cries. Please, I'll do anything. A beggar she was. Although he didn't need to breathe, he let out the breath holding the taste of her. One last satisfied sigh released the final trembles from his body, and he went to work. Unable to keep the song within him, he hummed as he bent over the recent corpse shackled to his bed. Clavanor ran a long, sickled finger over her still warm cheek and flicked a lock of her blonde hair out of the way. She was a fair woman, just on the other side of youth, slightly older than Clavanor preferred, but she had such a piercing scream, and she had begged. Oh, how he loved it when they begged. The dungeon's torchlight bounced off the pale skin of the naked woman. Open wounds from slow dagger slices peppered her body, though no blood dripped from the cuts. After Clavanor's tongue, only smears of red remained. He unlocked the manacles at each corner of the four-poster bed and hummed his tune, a song of his own making, chipper and grim all at once. He carried the naked shell of his plaything up the stairs. The fresh feeding invigorated his tired old body, and his spindly frame became lithe and muscular. The burden of the corpse in his arms lessened until she seemed to weigh as much as the feathered pillow from the bed in which her head had just been plucked. He traversed the spiraling staircase from the dungeon into the great hall of the castle, and sauntered out the door through the graveyard. The full moon illuminated the shattered remnants of the desecrated sister moon and cast light upon the graveyard littered with crooked headstones and crumbling mausoleums. Epitaphs etched into the stone spoke of long-forgotten ancestors, the ghosts of which still roamed the castle halls. Clavanor had grown so accustomed to them, his ears neither heard nor remarked on their moaning presence, much like a seaman forgets the rocking of a ship. He walked on powerful legs past the graveyard and down the hill to the abandoned well. With a shrug, he dropped the shell of his meal into the dried well. The soft thud of her body sent up a plume of rotting odor from below as she joined the feasted bones of all the young women who had come before. Soon Clavanor would need a new method of disposal. But on this night, the smell of decay and the buzz of flies bothered him not. With the screams of his meal rolling over inside his head, he floated across the graveyard on nimble feet. Occupied by the youthful glee of his feast, he nearly missed the wafting scent of a new arrival. The smell of opportunity drifted through the night and past the stale dilapidation of the graveyard to prickle Clavanor's senses. He dropped the tune he was humming and stopped to inhale deeply. The smell of a young woman and freshly spilled blood. Perhaps she was injured. With a smile, he slunk through the hedgestones and allied himself with the shadows as he neared the entrance to his crumbling castle. Giddy excitement vibrated through his bones. Could it be a perfect meal delivered right to his door? From the enshrouded darkness he peeked, and there, with trembling knuckles clutching her cloak and distress pinching her brow, she stood perched on his doorstep, a gift of blind fortune. Thirst seized Clavanor's throat while a hot desire burned through his loins as he watched her from the shadows. He could already hear her screaming as he imagined her naked body shackled in his feeding room. Desire urged him forward. He licked his lips, ready to pounce, yet 100 years of practice had taught him patience. He emerged from the shadows as silent as a breath before a suicide. "Might I be of assistance?" he asked. The young woman whirled around and clutched at her bosom as if to catch her heart from springing forth and dropping to the stone steps. "Dear sir, you gave me such a fright." "My deep apologies, young mademoiselle." He stepped forward and let the shattered moon cast its fractured light onto his features. Skin pale as bone, lips stained red from his victim's blood, eyes so lustrous they were frightening instead of beautiful. And his smile, a vampire's smile to haunt the books of children's bedtime stories which plant seeds of insidious fear growing into adulthood as mature and ripe for the plucking as the wide-eyed lass on his doorstep. Yet she did not shy, her eyes engorged like a magistrate at the confession of a killer. Not surprise, not fear. What essence of curiosity contorted beneath her green eyes? Why did she deny him the sweet satisfaction of her fear? "I beg your pardon, good sir, but I am out of sorts here on my own in this unfamiliar part of the country." She looked up at him and did not cower. Her voice betrayed not a single tremble as she locked her gaze on his inhuman eyes. "My dear, what unfortunate circumstance has brought you thus?" He spoke with the polite manners of a refined count, yet his stare carried the glowing terror which made all women scream in fear for their lives and their virtue. "Why, my old trusted horse has made his final journey. Fell and broke his leg, poor fool. It was all I could do to put him out of his misery." She glanced down at her hands, and Clavinor noticed she wore dried blood in the inner creases of her knuckles. Beneath her cloak a dark stain drenched her dress. Quite a misfortune indeed. Quick as a blink he reached across her and opened the door. It hinged forward with an inviting creak, a warning call for all who might mistake the darkness beyond for a sanctuary. "Please do come inside." He watched her step into the depths, crossing the threshold into his domain where helpless she would be to escape, no matter how loud she screamed. Oh, the anticipation. She looked around the dark interior, deliciously unaware of what was to come. Even lambs squeal before the slaughter, though they know nothing of their fate. An inherent mechanism of self-preservation this naive woman appeared to be without. "My apologies, madame. It seems the surprise honor of your arrival has me in abandon of my manners. I have not requested thy name." Her red locks slipped off her shoulder and exposed her naked neck as she turned and smiled. She uttered a single word. "Lilly." Enraptured, face blank as parchment before the ink, and jaw hinged to ventilate the flame burning inside that suddenly, inexplicably, caressed his crooked soul. Her name, a spell broken to entice his ears into bondage. Never had he heard a name so sweet, nor a voice so delicate. Lilly, a beauty to rival the succulent reputation of the flower. Clavinor stepped forward, his feet of their own accord, and placed a slow kiss on the top of her head. He cupped her chin to force her bright eyes to behold his own. She did not look away, did not tremble or start. She only stared with wide, hungry eyes which betrayed nothing. "In whom might I have the delight to intrude upon this evening?" she asked. What sinuous spell, a trickery! He could not look away, his body hardly his own. "Clavinor," he answered. The pulsing throb of her blood traveling through her veins aroused the very essence of his being into desire. He glanced down at the dried blood on her dress. "Might I offer you a fresh dress?" "You are too kind, Mr. Clavinor. I would be delighted to slip out of these soiled clothes." "My dear, sweet Lilly, follow me." How easy, how utterly convenient in design. He plucked up a cantilever and led her to the spiraling steps. Down and down they went into the cold, damp air, thick with the haunting of tortured souls. Now her screams would arrive to greet his ears like a long-departed lover. Now she would behold the chandeliers of iron hooks and manacles, the tables of dazzling sharp knives, and the piles of his victim's shoes and clothes in the corner. Now she would see the monster. But Lilly did not stop in her tracks as she stepped into the dungeon. She did not scream or fight for her life. They don't always. A great many turn docile as if their obedience will earn their freedom. But this one, she held no fear in her eyes. Perhaps the shock will catch up to her in a moment. Instead, she wandered farther inside, took off the cloak and draped it over the foot of the bed with the shackles attached to the bedposts. She turned to him and began unbuttoning her dress. This was not uncommon in Clavinor's experience. She would offer her body in the hopes he would spare her life. He smiled. Sometimes they made it all too easy. But her hands did not shake on the buttons or the lace as she undressed. What a shame, she must be a professional, he thought. He preferred his victims young, innocent, and unplucked. It made for the utmost terror which infused their blood with a delicious flavor. Unclothed in the dim light of the dungeon, she stepped up to him, the cold air prickling her skin. "Tell me, Clavinor, have you ever tasted a witch?" "A witch? A witch! Ah, proof of the dizzy lust and incessant need from earlier." But it mattered not. He was no stranger to witches. haughty and foolish as most women are. I have sampled many flavors in my time, he said. None like mine. Clavanor had had enough of her games. I will not let you live either way. He leapt forward and seized her bare throat. She pressed her nakedness against him. The warm rush of her skin asked for his in return. She stared into his eyes. Ah, yes, fear it is then. The scream that echoed off the walls rang so shrill, so thick with horror, Clavanor could have sipped it from the air. He nearly forgot himself as she struggled in his grasp. He tightened his taloned grip around her throat, and her scream choked off. No, he could not have that. He slammed her into the bed of satin sheets and locked her wrists and ankles to the bedposts. She cried and yanked against the iron. A witch, an actress. To Clavanor it mattered little, for even with her fakery, her terror was luscious. He climbed atop her and ran a sharpened nail across her breast. A trickle of blood trailed over her soft, pale skin. He bent over and raced to catch it with his tongue before it dripped onto the bed. Oh, sweet delight! The delicate flavor of life force saturated his senses as it spread across his palate. Too soon the taste faded from his tongue, and he fell forward, catching himself on his palms planted on either side of her head. When he looked down at his delectable victim, he found her smiling, a hungry, evil smile spreading delirium into her heated stare. What magic, what hopeless craving! It mattered not, for her next words nearly sent him into spasm. Please, she begged, and her begging mirrored his own desire. A longing which should not go unquenched. Please, more, she implored again. Clavanor, a being of bloodthirsty desire, was not one to deny her. Blood and screams, begging, begging, oh, the sweet yearning for her ichor, and what's more for her skin, and his, all at once. She struggled and he held her down, but when they locked eyes she smiled. She smiled so ravenously and so lasciviously it urged him on, a better climax than his wretched victims of past. The memory of them and all else faded, in an inebriated frenzy of her blood and her hungry flesh, her screams and her smile. The indulgence ran him wild, no longer man nor beast, but a being of divine need. A dizzying whirlwind transported him to another realm, an otherworldly darkness of eternity and infinite existence. Clavanor collapsed back into the reality of his torture chamber. He found his naked body slick with sweat and blood. When had he removed his clothes? He felt her damp body beneath his own and pushed himself up on his elbow to see if she was still alive. Cuts marred her flesh. He wound his gaze upward until he found her staring back at him with that voracious smile framed by the flame of her red hair. Blood dripped from her lips. He looked down at his chest to find nibbled bite marks dotting his body like cities on a map. Bewildered as to what type of spell she had cast over him, he looked back down at her in wordless awe. She closed her eyes and moaned as she licked the blood from her lips. Clavanor's naked body convulsed in response. What sorcery is this? He asked, though he cared little for the answer. His skin remained hot and begging for another trip into eternity, another journey into toe-curling tantrums of undeniable pleasure in a state outside himself. Once more, he begged. When had it become me begging for her, he wondered. But he gave it no more thought, for she granted him the pleasure, and he fell again into madness at the ecstasy. She screamed, and he screamed alongside her. Her body, her blood. Time did not exist, only her. One end of rapturous delight coalesced into another, each end a beginning into another undulation of moon-shattering abyss, a state of world-ending lust and hunger, for the continuation of his being depended wholly on her and her alone. He blinked into awareness. The torches had burned out, and only a set of candles in the corner fought the rule of darkness throughout the chamber. What night was this, and in what century? Oh, my sweet Lilly, he moaned as the swells of bliss slowed into another lull. His limbs felt heavy with satisfaction, yet heavier still. A clink of chains accompanied his movement. When had he been chained to the bed? He hardly knew or had cause to seek alarm. If she be a witch, then I bewitched, he thought. He felt ill, but he knew there existed no malady his flower could not quell. Where is my sweet Lilly? His eyes sought her as the dark seeks the rain of night. Not yet, Margaroth. Dare I enjoy this one? It is our first of his kind. Lilly paced barefoot across the dungeon. A strange shadow writhed in the corner. I crave it now! An eerie voice emanated from the darkness and clung to Lily's feet as she paced. Slow, Margaroth, slow. It's best not to gorge, but to suckle the life force. The desperate voice of the entity returned. His soul is ripe for the feeding, and I hunger. I hunger. Who lurked unseen in the shadows? Was it a sinister being or a trick of his mind? The fading intoxication left Clavanor with a veil of longing draped over his awareness. He could find no other person to which his Lily spoke. The only other presence was the writhing shadows of the dungeon's candlelight wrapped around her. "We ought to savor it," Lily said. "We've earned it, after all." "I must feed," the ethereal voice echoed off the stone. "You shall feed, but let me play once more." Lily glanced over at Clavinor lying prone in his own shackles. She smiled the demonic smile he had fallen in love with. "Ah, he wakes. My Lily, my deathly flower, come back to me, my dear." She walked toward him and grinned at the pitiful way he delighted in her arrival, like a toddler's spoon-fed lips awaiting the next mouthful. Her naked body held no fresh cuts or bruises. The places where his teeth and nails cut her skin had already healed, yet Clavinor thought he tasted her blood in his recent memory. But if that were true, why did he feel so famished? "I feel weak," he confessed. "I must have you." Lily trailed her fingers across his naked flesh from toe to chin. The shivers it sent through Clavinor nearly brought him to orgasm. He moaned as she traced her finger around his lips. She let her finger dip inside his mouth. He bit down and suckled her blood like he hadn't tasted blood in centuries. Oh, her blood, like the breath of air to a drowning victim. A confection so perfect, so delectably exquisite, as to enslave him to her forevermore. She retracted her hand. "No, I need more." "Come back," he begged. He swore it was but a moment, a cruel tease, yet the candles had burned out and left them in the dark. His voice shook with desperation as he implored, "Once more, my sweet Lily, once more." "Once more," she agreed, and climbed atop him. He could have wept with relief at her touch. He let her take over as he left the cold, damp dungeon and rode on waves of exhilaration so pleasurable as to forget he needed to feed and sleep. He did none of those, or possibly both at once. When his skin met hers, he saw only her, and the euphoria of time abandoned. Sleep. Screams reverberated through the landscape of dreams. They were not the screams of his victims. There was an uncanny familiarity about the torment of the tone. Could it be his own voice? Before the idea could find its feet, he slipped off to another dreamscape. A sea of red. He rode on waves of blood and pleasure so intense and sharp the sensation was nearly painful. He reveled in the severe brightness, like lightning strikes of ravishing bliss. An anonymous nagging tugged at his awareness and interrupted his revelry, a feeling as if he had forgotten something of vital importance. What had he forgotten? The dreamscape shifted, and he begged to return to the sea of blood and pleasure. Out of the darkness, a window appeared before him. Curiosity traveled him forward. He looked out the glass to find the graveyard outside his castle. Hyber's half-moon stared down at him. Deep in his subconscious, he knew that was wrong. The single unshattered moon was supposed to be full. He had glimpsed it only an hour ago. When he focused on the moon, the crescent began to shrink. In a single blink, it waned before his eyes until nothing remained, save for a darkened sky. "I'm dreaming," he realized. "It must be a dream." Clavinor emerged from the edge of time into consciousness back on Illyria. He blinked, but his eyelids were so heavy. It felt a tremendous feat to lift them half open. He lay in the bed he reserved for his victims. He was no longer shackled, but the satin bed sheets were pulled up to his chin, and the fabric weighed him down. Why did the sheets feel so heavy? And where was his Lily? He tried to speak, but he found the task impossible. Only a dry croak crackled the back of his throat, and did not escape his lips. "Where is my Lily?" he thought. "It is time," Lily said from outside his vision. Oh, sweet salvation! She prowled into his sight fully clothed. "No, where is she going?" "Let us feast," Lily spoke in response to her own words, but in a devilish voice. "You've been so patient, Margaroth," Lily said, her voice returned to normal. "You see, it was better this way." "Better or not, now it is time," she answered herself in the voice of borrowed evil. "Let us have him." It stole all his strength just to keep his eyes open as he watched Lily converse with herself and step forward. Yes, yes, come to me," he begged, unable to bring sound to his voice. "Let me have you once more." Lily reached her hand up to his face. He begged for her skin, her blood, her parted thighs. Nothing else in the world came close. Nothing else brought him to the realm of pure and absolute ecstasy. But her hand did not meet his skin. Her fist clenched around the bedsheet below his chin and ripped the satin bedding away with a hiss. Clavinor could not fathom the sight beneath the sheets, like the bones of a skeleton shoved into a sausage casing. Terror, disgust, fear as he realized he stared upon his own emaciated body. What has become of me? His body looked as if he hadn't fed for years. This must be a dream. The Lily who was not Lily laughed with an ear-piercing cackle. She grabbed his sunken cheeks in both hands and stared with eyes ready to devour. "No, my sweet Lily." "Good night, my dark paramour." Lilly planted a farewell kiss on his lips, her loving hands on either side of his face. With the final reservoir of his strength, Clavinor smiled at her, waiting to wake from his nightmare and return to her arms. She smiled back and snapped his neck. Thank you all so much for listening to this little excerpt. There is definitely more to the story. If you are curious, feel free to go check it out. I will put links down in the description. Make sure you comment down below what you think of the story, and if you want to hear more dark, gothic vampire stories from me in the future. Anyway, happy Valentine's Day. Thanks for watching.